Echoes Hugh. Audio Productions. Smooth, sweet sounds. Echoes Hugh Audio Productions proudly presents a J.S. Mensah audio work.
Welcome to the Sporting Field of Play podcast show. This is the History Edition with me, George Soper. Before we get started, a quick reminder to subscribe to Echoes Hugh Audio Productions by following us on social media for more updates and exclusive content. And if you enjoy this show, then please give us a like and write us a review. Hello sports fans and podcast show fans. Welcome to another episode of our pod where we delve into the rich history of the world's various sports and analyse some of the greatest players and participants. Good day, cricket lovers. Today, we're going to be talking about one of the most storied rivalries in the history of sports, the Ashes series. For over a century, England and Australia have battled it out on the cricket field, with the fate of a small urn symbolising cricketing supremacy. That's not all. In today's episode, we'll have a special focus on one of the greatest players to ever grace the Ashes, Shane Warne. Grab your bat and let's take a journey through time. The story of the Ashes begins on the 29th of August 1882 at the Oval in London. England faced a formidable Australian side in what was only the 9th Test match ever played. The unthinkable happened. Australia won by just 7 runs, marking the first time that England had been defeated on home soil by their Australian counterparts. The match itself was dramatic, with Fred Sporoff, the Australian fast bowler known as the Demon, taking 14 wickets. England, chasing just 85 runs to win, crumbled under pressure. The English press and public were in shock. The Sporting Times published a satirical obituary, famously declaring that English cricket had died and the body will be cremated and the ashes taken to Australia. This tongue-in-cheek announcement sparked the legend of the Ashes. When England toured Australia that year, their captain, Ivo Bligh, vowed to regain those ashes. After England won 2 of the 3 tests, a group of Melbourne women, including Bligh's future wife, presented him with a small urn, said to contain the ashes of English cricket, and so the Ashes were born. As the years rolled on, the Ashes quickly became one of the most anticipated events in the cricketing calendar. The contests were hard-fought, and the rivalry between England and Australia grew fiercer with each series. One of the early legends of the Ashes was W.G. Grace, bearded giant of English cricket, whose presence on the field was as commanding as his statistics. On the Australian side, The name Victor Trumper still echoes through the annals of cricket history. Trumper was known for his stylish batting and ability to dominate even the best bowling attacks on any pitch. The early 20th century saw the Ashes gain even more prestige. In 1928 to 1929, England, led by Percy Chapman, inflicted one of Australia's heaviest defeats, winning the series 4-1 on Australian soil. But Australia would soon strike back with a vengeance. The 1930s ushered in a golden era for Australia, thanks to one man, Don Bradman. The Don was a phenomenon, a once-in-a-century player who made batting look absurdly easy. His Ashes record is staggering, with 19 centuries and an average of 89.78 across 37 tests against England. Bradman's brilliance was so overwhelming that England resorted to the controversial bodyline tactics in 1932 to 1933 to curb his scoring. Led by Douglas Jardine, England's bowlers aimed at the body with their leg side field, sparking outrage but ultimately regaining the Ashes. After World War II, the Ashes resumed in 1946 to 1947, and Australia quickly re-established its dominance. The 1948 series in England saw the emergence of what is called the Invincibles, the Australian team led by Don Bradman that went undefeated throughout the tour. Bradman's final test innings ended in a duck, but his legacy was already secure. The 1950s and 60s were periods of fluctuating dominance. England had their moments, particularly in 1953, when they regained the Ashes after a 19-year drought, thanks to the brilliance of Len Hutton and Jim Laker. Laker's 19 wickets in a single match at Old Trafford in 1956 remains one of the most extraordinary feats in cricket's history. But by the late 1960s and into the 1970s, Australia began to take control again. The 1974-75 series is infamous for the ferocity of Australia's fast bowling attack, led by Dennis Lely and Jeff Thompson, terrorised the English batsmen with their pace and aggression. The 1980s belonged largely to Australia as well, but England did have their moments, such as the 1981 series, often called Botham's Ashes, where Ian Botham's extraordinary all-round performances turned what seemed like certain defeat into a famous victory for England. The Ashes took on a new level of intensity in the 1990s and 2000s. Australia dominated the series throughout the 90s, largely thanks to the brilliance of players like Steve Waugh, Glenn McGrath and, of course, Shane Warne, who I'll discuss in more detail in our special segment. However, in 2005, England staged one of the greatest comebacks in Ashes history. After 16 years of Australian dominance, England won the series 2-1 in what many consider the greatest Ashes series of all time. The matches were nail-biting, with the likes of Andrew Flintoff, Kevin Peterson and Michael Vaughan playing crucial roles. The 2005 Ashes not only revived interest in Test cricket, but also reignited the historic rivalry in the 21st century. Since then, the Ashes have had a healthy mix of both English and Australian victories. Australia regained the urn in 2006-7 with a 5-0 whitewash, a feat they repeated in 2013-14. England, however, triumphed in 2009, 2011 and 2015, with the latter series featuring a stunning debut performance by Stuart Broad, Trent Bridge. The most recent encounters have kept the rivalry alive, with each series producing memorable moments and ensuring that the Ashes remain one of the most coveted trophies in cricket. Now let's take a closer look at a player who has left an indelible mark on the Ashes and cricket as a whole, Shane Warne. If there's one cricketer who could change the course of a match with a single ball, it was Warne. His mastery of leg spin bowling revolutionised the game and gave us some of the most unforgettable moments in Ashes history. Warne burst onto the scene in 1993 with what is now famously known as the ball of the century. In the first test at Old Trafford, Warne's very first delivery to England's Mike Gatting drifted in, pitched outside leg stump and then spun viciously to clip the top off of the stump. Gatting was left in disbelief, and the cricket world knew it was witnessing the start of something extraordinary. Over the years, Warne became England's chief tormentor. He took 195 wickets in 36 Ashes tests, the most by any bowler in the history of the series. Cunning, control and sheer ability to outthink his batsmen made him almost unplayable at times. Whether it was his flippers, Googlies, or that devastating leg break, Warne had the arsenal to dismantle even the most accomplished batsman. Beyond the numbers, Warne's charisma and larger-than-life personality made him a global cricketing icon. His rivalry with England's batsmen became the stuff of legend, and his on-field batters with players like Mensah Hussain, Alex Stewart and later Kevin Peterson are still talked about today. Warne retired from international cricket after Australia's 5-0 whitewash in the 2007 Ashes series. Fittingly, he reached the milestone of 700 Test wickets during that series, bowling out on a high as one of the greatest cricketers of all time. But Warne's influence on the Ashes and the game of cricket continues to be felt. He inspired a generation of spinners and remains a beloved figure in the cricketing world, not just for his skill, but for the way he played the game. With flair, confidence and a love for the sport that was evident every time he stepped onto the field. As we come to the end of today's episode, it's clear that the Ashes is much more than just a cricket series. It's a symbol of national pride, a tradition steeped in history, and a rivalry that has produced some of the greatest moments in sports. And now, let's turn to some questions from our listeners. So the first question comes from Terry. Is cricket still a middle-class sport? Really good question, Terry. Appreciate that coming in. I think it really depends, because there's a view, having lived in Australia, I had a view coming from the history of the Ashes that Australia is kind of seen as not the way they've played it in the past, not as gentlemanly and as, in brackets, middle class as England have played it before. But in Australia, it is a middle class sport much more than it is here, really. I mean, AFL is the sport that people get pushed into if they're from a working class background, and cricket really is something for people who've gone to private school, who've had a really solid upbringing. It's actually the other way around. And now I think in this country, in the UK, I think cricket has become a more working class sport, especially probably, since that 2005 series, that Freddie Flintoff series. I think cricket, I mean, even for me growing up in a working class environment, cricket was never for me. It was like whenever anyone would say, we're going to do cricket in PE today, I'd say, I don't know anyone who go, I really want to play cricket. It never washed with us. But it has become a much more inclusive sport. And I mean, still got a long way to go, like all sports have, but I think it's becoming less middle class and more inclusive. Next question comes from Frank. Thanks for this, Frank. Would Shane Warne have thrived or struggled with social media? That's an interesting one. I like that, Frank. I think Warne was a character, and I think that has pros and cons, really. And I think with social media, I mean, when he passed away, it wasn't as volatile and as aggressive online as it is now. And there's a lot of vitriol and negative energy. And I think Warne, I think if he was playing when, obviously because he was alive when social media was there, but if there was social media in the 90s when he was in his heyday, I mean, I think he probably would have been chaos. He would have caused absolute murders. I mean, he got in enough trouble as it is. So I can't imagine what he would have been like, in the mid-90s if everyone had smartphones. And, I don't think he would have lasted very long. And again, bringing it back to Terry's question, it was still more middle class in the 90s. So I think he would have been hammered. I mean, he didn't have a great relationship with the Australian cricketing hierarchy as it was. So, if you added a few Instagram photos of him on a night out, I think he probably would have got in a lot more trouble. Last question comes from Steve. What makes Australians especially adapted to cricket? I think it's, again, I think that the weather there, apart from in Melbourne and Victoria, where it's on a par with London, it's 4 seasons in a day, all year round. I mean, people are much more outdoorsy and it just, not even cricket, but sport in general. They're very outdoorsy people, the Australians, and they want to be out They want to socialise. And I just think here, again, that's probably why we've always produced good boxers in this country, really good football players. I think all year round sports that we can play all the time, we seem to thrive at. But again, over there, they've just got the weather, man. They've got the space, they've got the weather. And I think it's probably now, especially the last 10 years, I think Australia is is becoming a much wealthier country, like superseding the UK in a lot of ways. So I think people can afford to have hobbies, can afford to work 4 days a week, 5 days a week, finish early, job and not clock off. Whereas I think in the UK, we're very much work 6, 7 days a week to survive. So I think Australians have the time, they have the weather, and then there's a real competitive energy you get from Australians. You don't realise it till you're there. They love to win and they despise losing with a passion. Everyone has this thing, Aussies are laid back. They're not. They're really competitive. And I think that's what makes the Ashes great, because we're a proud country and so are they. And it's great. And we are cousins in a way. And in sport, you can really see that. That's why the Ashes, it's up there with the heavyweight title and the World Cup. It really is a special thing even for people who don't like cricket. And that's a wrap for today's episode. Thanks for joining me on this History Edition journey. Tune in next week on Tuesday for the next episode. Until then, keep competing, guys. Yours, Georgie Boy.
Thanks for listening to an Echoes Hue audio productions project. Smooth, sweet sounds. Don't forget to subscribe to Echoes Hue Audio Productions by following us on social media for more updates and exclusive content. And if you enjoy the show, then please give us a like and write us a review. The Sporting Field of Play History Edition is written and presented by George Soper. The podcast is directed and produced by J.S. Mensah. Our theme music is by Vitaly Vakulenko.